Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist. Today I am joined by a good friend, Micah, over at the Ultimate Goosebumps Man. And we're going to be looking at Goosebumps 2023, Season 1. And we're going to be talking about how we would have done that season differently. Because we both have pretty similar opinions on the actual season we got. And I think both of our ideas we feel possibly could have been more intriguing and better to see the show start out on, and possibly could have maybe prevented them from going the anthology route. So who knows? But Mike, I'm gonna give the floor to you real quick. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. Just been busy with school. It's definitely been interesting also doing this rewriting project. It's my first time ever really writing something this big. So my story may be a bit clunkier than yours, but we'll see what happens.
Okay. And we told each other that we wanted to have a little criteria before we made our stories up. Our first rule we said was that we had to use the books that were chosen to be interpreted from season one. So the books specifically, not counting the episodes that are named after books that have nothing to do with them, basically. We're looking at The Cuckoo Clock of Doom, Say Cheese and Die, The Haunted Mask, Go Eat Worms, and Night of the Living Dummy. Those five books had to be used in our story in some capacity. But everything else, we can chop off episodes. We can, change, add a book, add something else to it. That was the first idea. And the second idea was that we had to keep the characters for the most part, but we can choose to axe some specific ones if it makes sense. So, with that criteria, we each have totally different avenues of where we thought the show could go. As you'll see, mine, when we get to mine, it's going to be totally different from Micah's, vice versa. So, grab yourself some microwave popcorn, grab yourself a drink, because we're going to be talking about our hypothetical season ones and what that entails. So, Micah, I'm going to give you the floor first for this collaboration here. What would your season one kind of start off with and just go from there?
All right, so starting off, I've pretty much kept the first four episodes in the same order that they are in the original series. So starting off with Say Cheese and Die, you open up very similar to how season one opened up normally, with Harold Biddle and his family, because his parents are alive in this version, and they're out having a little campfire, telling some scary stories back and forth. And eventually, after a while, his parents go in to go to bed, and they tell Harold, okay, you can linger out here for a while. Just make sure you put the fire out before you enter back inside. And Harold ends up getting distracted doing something, getting engrossed in a book or something. And he ends up going inside while forgetting to put out the fire. And while this is happening, you see some hints of this weird, like the sinister entity kind of hiding behind the scenes, watching this happen. And after Harold goes in, it notices that he didn't put out the fire, and it uses its powers to spread the fire over to the house and cause it to basically burn to the ground with Harold and his parents inside of it. And I kind of wanted to use that as a little homage to the plot of the kind of the way Hannah dies in Ghost Next Door, because I'm wanting to kind of incorporate little Goosebumps references throughout the season that maybe don't apply to direct adaptations, but take elements from different books to kind of flesh it out and make it feel more fun for fans. And so after this cold open, you see Harold and his family die in the fire. You cut to the modern day, and you meet Isaiah. And he has a friend named Sherry in this universe, who obviously, if you know, Sherry from Say Cheese and Die. And basically, him and Sherry are walking past the Biddle house, which is now abandoned. And Sherry is basically telling him this urban legend about what happened there, how Harold Biddle and his family died in a fire, and some sinister entity since then has started haunting the house and is basically been manipulating things around the town and causing bad things to happen. And of course, Isaiah kind of just writes this off and says this is actually just kind of a silly myth. And he's also we also get to learn that he is a big photography fan. He is the photographer for the school yearbook, and he has a big collection of cameras. He loves kind of looking into cameras and messing around with them, taking pictures. And basically later on, he ends up going into the Biddle house after passing by it one day and having this strange presence that feels like he's kind of drawing him in. And when he goes inside, he ends up searching around. He finds this hidden room in the back with all of these different items: a mask, a cuckoo clock, a worm terrarium, a ventriloquist dummy, and hidden away in a secret compartment is an old Polaroid camera. And so he kind of gets interested because obviously he loves cameras. So he starts kind of messing around with this. He's never really seen an old Polaroid before. And he starts just taking pictures of the different items in the house for the fun of it. So he takes a picture of the camera. I mean, not the camera, the mask, the terrarium, the clock, the dummy. And as he's kind of messing around with this, he then hears some kind of footsteps or movement in the house. And he freaks out thinking, oh, maybe someone's in here. I shouldn't be here. He puts the camera back and leaves. And later on, when he gets home, he kind of takes off his bag to start kind of going through some pictures he took at the recent game. And he finds the camera has somehow appeared in his bag. And so he kind of is weirded out by it, but thinks, it was dark in there. I was in a panic to try and leave. Maybe I just accidentally put the camera in the bag in my panic. And so he starts taking pictures kind of like in typical Say Cheese and Die fashion. And a lot of the stuff that happens in the original book happens to these characters in a different way. Takes a picture of his dad's car. It ends up totaled in the picture. And his dad ends up getting into a really bad car accident that basically leaves him comatose in a hospital. And he takes a picture of, basically he goes to one of the baseball games that's happening at the school. And while he's taking pictures of the individual athletes for the yearbook, one of them sees that he has the Polaroid and asks him to take a picture with it. And when he does so, in the photo, it shows this athlete knocked out cold on the baseball field, which then happens. And then Sherry ends up asking him to take a picture. And when he does, she's not in the photo. And then she disappears for real. And so a lot of similar events happen to the original book. And Isaiah kind of gets weirded out by this camera. He doesn't know what to think of it. And that's kind of, then he ends up taking a picture of the Biddle house that happened earlier on in the episode. And kind of the way this episode leaves off and ties into the next episode is that he notices in the photo of the Biddle house he took, there's the picture of the house, and then there's a sinister entity lurking in the bottom right window in the photo. And he looks at another photo, and it's the one he took of the mask. And the mask in the photo, which originally in the house looked very fake and kind of plasticky and sheepy looking, looks very real and alive in the photo. And that's kind of the shot that episode 1 ends off of, which then ties into Haunted Mask. And so in Haunted Mask, we meet Isabella. She is this very timid and shy girl who doesn't really seem to get along with people. She's not really have a lot of friends. She's very much a loner. But she ends up actually working at this haunted house that's in this local Halloween carnival that's set up in Port Lawrence. And she uses her job at this as a scare actor to kind of break out of her box, and it allows her to open up and kind of have more fun and let loose without people knowing that it's her. And once she goes to work, like one of her first days of work for the season, she notices that she doesn't have a costume. She can't figure out what to wear. Like, she doesn't like anything anymore. She thinks that she's worn the same costume for years and she just wants to be something different. And on her way to work one day, she ends up passing the Biddle house. And once again, she gets drawn in by the same entity that drew Isaiah in. And she finds the mask. And after inspecting it for a bit, she realizes that she's late for work at the house. So for the haunted house. And she quickly leaves. And when she gets there, she finds the mask sitting in her dressing room. Somehow got there. She has no idea how. She's very freaked and weirded out by it, but she doesn't have a lot of time to figure out a costume. So she's like, okay, this is weird, but I have no other choice at this point. So she puts the mask on. And after scaring people for a bit, finding that's very effective at scaring people, she takes the mask off for the first time to take a little break and get some water during a little break time she has. And then she puts the mask on a second time. And when she does this, she starts realizing that she isn't able to think for herself as much. She starts getting very violent and aggressive with the customers going through the house. And she notices some weird things like the masked eyes start glowing, or the mouth starts moving with her own. And after getting in trouble with her boss or manager about how violent she's becoming with the guests, she goes into the dressing room to try to remove the mask. And in a scene very similar to kind of like the Jim Carrey mask movie, like the sides of the mask start turning into flesh and like wrapping around her head. and the mask starts like transforming from this cheap plastic look into a real grotesque looking monster. And basically at this point it's completely taking her over, and she ends up running out of the house and going on a rampage around the carnival in the mask. And eventually she also has this prop head that she has. This is kind of an homage to the head Carly Beth has in the book. And as the mask starts taking her over, the prop head starts actually gaining her old face and coming to life that way as the mask takes her face. And eventually, after a while, she ends up running into her brother at the carnival. Her brother's kind of established at the beginning of the episode. And kind of like in the 2023 show, he realizes it's her and is able to break through to her, and she's able to break the mask possession and take it off. And then basically that kind of ties into Cuckoo Clock of Doom in a way, because as she's leaving and kind of wanting to put the mask back in the Biddle house after what happened, James sees her go in, and that's kind of the little catalyst there. And moving on to Cuckoo Clock of Doom, James ends up going into the house, and James's character is very different from his original counterpart. I've changed him completely, where he's this pretty grief-stricken person. He had a very good relationship with his mom when he was younger, and recently his mom passed away in a car accident where he was driving it. So he is very grief-stricken, and he kind of blames himself for the accident, even though it wasn't actually caused by him. He just has this kind of survivor's guilt. And when he goes inside and discovers this cuckoo clock, after accidentally bumping into it and kind of messes with the hands, and it realizes that it sends him back in time a bit. So after realizing this, he's like, okay, maybe I can use this clock to go back and save my mom. And while he's messing with the clock and trying to figure out a way to send him back in time, he accidentally breaks it, which then causes this complete spiral where he keeps going back in time, much like in the original book, where every 30 minutes he jumps back and more in time. He doesn't know how far he'll jump back. It could be minutes, it could be hours, it could be years. And as he's trying to figure out a way to reverse this and bring him back to normal before he ages out of existence, he's able to relive times with his mom when he was younger. And throughout these experiences, he's able to start kind of being able to let go. And eventually, while he's trying to fix the clock, he gets sent back to the time of the accident. And so basically he's able to see while he's driving, he gets one last conversation with his mom before the accident happens. And he realizes that it wasn't his fault. It was this other person. And he's finally able to get closure for his mom's death before he's able to quickly rush back to the house, fix the clock, and it sends him back to his normal timeline. And basically that's kind of where Cuckoo Clock of Doom ends and Go Eat Worms starts. And basically Go Eat Worms, I pretty much kept it the same as in the 2023 show, just because that episode was so good. I feel like it didn't need to be changed all that much. But basically, Lucas goes into the house. His character is, again, basically unchanged from the original because he was easily the best character. And he finds the worm terrarium and decides to take it home with him because he has this little pet worms that he's keeping in this kind of smaller box. He doesn't really have a good place for them. So he thinks this terrarium will work well. And basically, he puts the worms in the terrarium, and somehow the strange forces within this terrarium and this sinister entity kind of controlling everything causes the worms to come alive and possess Lucas, much like in this original episode. And he starts doing all these dangerous stunts. He starts doing things that could easily kill him if he's not dangerous. And the events play out pretty much the same as in the episode. I don't think I need to go into that too much. But then we move into episode 5, which is not Reader Beware. It's Night of the Living Dummy. And this follows Margot. And basically Margot is kind of this, again, kind of quiet girl. She doesn't really speak to many people, but she kind of has this tendency when she's angry to run her mouth a bit. And she ends up finding Slappy in the house. And because, again, when we see in episode 1, when Isaiah took pictures of all these items, I kind of didn't explain that, but him taking pictures of all the items with the camera is what curses them and brings them to life. And when she takes Slappy home with her, just kind of, she doesn't take him home, much like the other ones. She kind of just, she sees him, interacts with him a bit, thinking it's kind of cool to see this because she's into kind of these old vintage things and she collects vintage stuff. And And basically when she comes home, Slappy follows her home per usual. And she ends up reading the card that brings Slappy to life. And it basically is like a ramped up, darker, more intense Night of the Living Dummy book where Slappy is actually doing things that could hurt people. Like he's not just doing mischievous things. Like he kicks her dad down the stairs and causes him to break his leg. He, much like another Night of the Living Dummy books, he starts speaking for Margot and saying things that she wouldn't normally say. And just doing other things like that. And things just keep kind of escalating and becoming more sinister surrounding Slappy. And so the whole episode centers around Margot trying to find a way to stop him and eventually realizing that there's some kind of entity controlling everything going on. And kind of she's the one who realizes that things start becoming connected because she's seen kind of the effects that happen with the other monsters throughout the show through other interactions she's had with the other characters. And basically episode 6, we get into Give Yourself Goosebumps. And this is where the season really starts changing. So basically all the characters realize that all these items have tied back to the Biddle house. So they all can go back to the house and meet up for the first time to actually start talking and piecing together all these different things that have been happening with the items they took. And they start uncovering the truth, kind of like in the show. They start uncovering the truth of the Biddle house through various pieces of research. They even use the clock at one point because James reveals to them that the clock can make you time travel. And so they use the clock to go back and start trying to figure out the story, like what caused Harold Biddle's death and the things like that. They start discovering the sinister entity that's kind of been following each of them through their encounters with the items. Isaiah shows them the photo he took of the house that has the entity in the corner and just other things like that. And everything spirals to the finale where they realize that this entity is basically something that ties itself into tragedies. And because of this tragic event surrounding Harold Biddle, it kind of latched onto this house and was controlling the events that caused Biddle's death. And basically, and it kind of has Biddle stalking them as well throughout the season, which I didn't get much into. It's not super big in the plot. Like Harold Biddle is more of a catalyst in this, just because I felt like his character isn't like super interesting or big. But his death is kind of the catalyst for this entity to start haunting these objects. And they realize that I keep repeating myself, but yeah, basically this entity is basically trying to manipulate things to gain more power and cause more tragedy with these items, like Isaiah's dad getting into the car accident, the kid getting knocked out in the baseball game, Margot's dad having his leg broken by Slappy, and all these other things that start happening to continuously gain more power from these different tragic events. And they realize that the whole catalyst of this was Harold's death. So they use the cuckoo clock to go back in time to try and save Harold and his family. And that's where you get into You Can't Scare Me. And in You Can't Scare Me, basically, when they're back in time, they are trying to find the Biddle house, which is actually surrounded by like a marshland swamp area in this version of the story. And while they're traversing to try and find the house, get to the house and save Biddle, this entity has followed them through. And as a method to try and stop them, summons all these mud monsters from the marsh surrounding it to basically try to like hunt these people down, these kids down to try and stop them. There's a big action scene kind of I planned with the mud monsters, like they're trying to like drag the characters under the water or just doing other things to try and halt them from getting to the house. And eventually they end up getting to the house, and the entity keeps manipulating things to try and stop them. And he even starts the house on fire, like in the opening sequence. But they're able to actually save Harold and the parents in time and get them out of the house. They have another encounter with the mud monsters as they try to escape and get to the clock to reset the time. And eventually they're successful in doing so, and they jump back to modern day. But they realize Harold and his parents aren't there with them. They don't know what happened to him. Even though they saved him, they're not sure if their efforts actually did anything. And it's not really going to get answered till the end of the show. But then they realize that this entity, now that the tragedy of Harold's death has reversed, it then decides to go to the Halloween carnival that's in town and basically uses the power it's accumulated from the events that happened. While Harold's death didn't happen and it doesn't have the vessel of the house, it still has gained the power from the different tragedies it caused with the items. And so it goes to the Halloween carnival and takes it over. And that turns the carnival into the Horrorland we all know and love from the books. Like, all the workers start transforming into these horned monsters, which obviously are the horrors. All the rides and attractions start becoming some of the stuff from Horrorland, like the Doom Slide and the Hall of Mirrors and all this stuff. And so in Welcome to Horrorland, the teens go to this theme park to try and stop the entity once and for all. And when they get there, they're all end up getting separated, kind of in a similar way to the climax of Dream Warriors, where they all basically are separated into different parts of Horrorland, and they each have to kind of face off against these different monsters that are also kind of homages to other Goosebumps books. Like, there's a little homage to Werewolf Fever Swamp with one of the characters. One of the characters has to deal with the Doom Slide, and all these, after fighting through these different areas, they're able to kind of come back and use the stuff they learned to eventually defeat the entity once and for all. And after the entity is defeated and things go back to normal, they kind of are walking through the town and they pass by the Biddle house, which has now been like restored and it looks new, pristine, like it never was burned down or anything. And kind of in a similar way, I know we kind of like to make fun of Sony using Jumanji as a setup for Goosebumps, but they kind of in a similar way to how Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle ends. They pass by the house and see Harold Biddle, who's now in like his 30s or 40s. As an adult, he has like a family of his own, and he's just kind of, they see that he's living a good life after reversing whatever happened to him. And the season kind of ends with a little nod or hints towards what could happen next season, and that's kind of where it cuts off.
You know, listening to your entire story, I like the direction of using the items later on in the season for a greater story than just, you know, having the kids go through this. I like how you tried to tie together these items by the end of it, and then actually set it up for a finale of using Horrorland as the spectacle point, which I think the actual season was trying to do, but didn't quite execute that. So what brought upon, you know, some of the direction choices that you chose?
Well, one of my things I chose to mainly with the character changes, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted each of their personalities and interests to tie in some way to whatever item they end up interacting with, because it just explains why they're drawn to that specific item, why that item starts haunting them, why the entity starts powering the items in the certain way that it does, and kind of how it starts causing their lives to spiral as a result of the entity possessing these items. And like with the camera, for instance, I also kind of wanted, since that's the pilot episode, at the start, it was only the camera that was possessed by the entity, because this entity latches onto tragedies and then usually will tie its power into a specific item that was the closest tied to the victim of this tragedy. So Biddle was a big photographer. He loved this camera, which you kind of learn and give yourself goosebumps in those little exposition lore areas when they time travel. And so this entity latched its power onto the camera. And when Isaiah took photos of the different items in the house with the camera, it transferred the entity's powers to the other items as well. And that's kind of what causes them to start becoming haunted.
Okay. Well, Micah, I think you had a solid season idea there. And honestly, I like the idea of seeing Harold Biddle have his closure at the end. You kind of saw that in episode 8 of season 1, but getting that you know, this is deserved ending in the final episode of your episode 8, and then setting up what can be for next season. I think that's a good way to leave off on it. Sends it off on a happier note, which you don't often see, especially what we got in the actual show. I don't know what they were trying to go with there. But yeah, unless you have anything else you want to add on to your story, you want to get into my story?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So some of these ideas I had before the season even came out. Some of these I've kind of retrofitted some ideas that I actually saw in the show that I thought were kind of cool into now my hybridized idea. I shaved off an episode from the 10 episode count, so we only have 9. And let's get right into it. So, my first episode is pretty much an entire prologue. It's almost a 90-minute episode in my mind. It would be one of the longer episodes. Because we're cutting out an episode, we can make some longer. And this one would be called Welcome to Dead House. Yes, and I'm calling this Welcome to Dead House because this sets up the entire season. And it's entirely in 1994 in a flashback. We get to meet Harold Biddle in the first episode. He's the main character. He carries around his Walkman. He has a book bag full of Goosebumps books. Yes, we're going meta. He's a Goosebumps fan, and he's eclectic. He likes to go to thrift stores and look for things that kind of resemble things that he's read in Goosebumps. Like he goes to a camera shop and he makes a sly joke that he calls the owner Spidey, and he has no idea what he's talking about. But Goosebumps fans would know that. He goes to like a mom and pop antique store and sees a cuckoo clock with a orange bird. He's like, I can paint it, I can turn them yellow. And he's like talking in a meta fashion. Like we fans would understand that as references, especially if we grew up on those Jacobus covers. Well, he is in this show. I wanted to make all the characters around the age of 15 a little bit younger because it would make more sense around that time. Um, for them to be still reading Goosebumps, you know, you don't want to make them 16 or 17. That'll just be too weird, right? So he has a friend named Nathan Bratt. Nathan Bratt in this version is actually his only friend he has. And he and his friend are ruthlessly picked on by this group of friends who we later find out are the core cast of modern day characters we see later on in the future episodes. Well, when push comes to shove, let's just say within Harold Biddle's household, one night, him and his friend Nathan are, you know, having a slumber party and just hanging out. And Nathan and Nathan and Harold discover there's an odd noise coming from below his room, and they look through the vent and they see this yellowish glow coming from underneath the vent, and they're like, "Wait, there could be something underneath the house." So the boys go down into this underground cavern, and they realize that it's pretty much like an ultimate hangout spot, and it's really creepy, and they think that would be really fun to invite all these kids over for Halloween and throw a party down there because nobody would ever know that they're down there. Well, because they're so, I guess, lost in their pragmaticism, Harold uh, is pretty much planning the party, but he wants to exclude the people that has been horrible to him. But Nathan, being the kiss ass that he is, he goes and runs and spills the beans to, I guess, Isaiah's dad that, hey, they're throwing this party here. And Isaiah's dad has it really out for Harold and wants him to kind of pay for not for like pretty much purposely excluding them from being invited after the entire grade got invited. So he goes and grabs his friends, and they want to pull a prank on Harold's party. Well, the night before the party was to ever happen, we see something weird start happening with Harold because it's getting close to Halloween, and you know Halloween maybe opens the floodgates for supernatural, right? Well, we see the yellow glow again, but now it's manifested into a mist, and the mist kind of possesses all these eclectic items that he's reworked into his, I guess, idea of what these items will look like in real life from his favorite Goosebumps books. He loves Go Eat Worms, The Haunted Mask, Night of the Living Dummy. He's made his own Slappy, right? This yellow mist has now infiltrated his items, so to speak, and they have essentially come to life. And him being like awestruck, he's like, "Oh, this is the coolest thing ever." Well, as he's starting to meet these items, he starts to experience them a little bit before, you know, his friends come over to, you know, I guess set up the party. The prank happens, which ends up really backfiring. And let's just say it catches a specific room on fire, Harold's room. And within the timbers, as Harold is burning, he tries to go down into the cavern, and he's essentially stuck down there because above him, his entire room collapses, trapping him down there. So he's succumbing to his burns, and he dies a lonely death down in this place underneath his house. And all of the kids' parents make a swear pact. Nobody ever tells a soul, and they make everybody swear And the only person that witnessed this ever happen was his best friend Nathan. Well, let's fast forward to modern times. Well, we catch up into the second act of the first episode. Nathan is now, let's say, the principal of this high school. He hasn't left his hometown of Point Lawrence, neither has all the other teens who had made that pact years ago. And Nathan kind of has some power over all these kids' parents, and they know it. And he's kind of used his power trip as principal to steer some, intimidation into the children. Well, the children, Isaiah, Margot, and all the other characters we get to meet in the show, they are very well aware of the legend of Harold Biddle and how he died in a house fire, or there was a house fire, but he disappeared, and there was a lot of theories maybe that he committed arson to try to fake his disappearance or whatnot. But nobody really knows what happened to him. So the kids take it upon themselves one night to go into the rundown Biddle mansion to kind of herb explore. Little do they know that Nathan Bratt at this point, as we will see before the events of the kids actually going in there, finally accrued enough money, I guess from extorting the parents for all these years, to buy and refurbish the Biddle house. And he's actually repaired his former friend's room and restored it and have picked up these items and added them into the collection as his friend would have had them in his room. And I think he's doing this to pay respect to his friend. Well, the kids go in there and they thought that the house was destroyed, but it's been repurposed, and they have no idea who's bought the home or what have you. But they find Harold's room, and Harold's room has all these items around, and it's getting around Halloween, and let's just say that yellow mist from the beginning of the episode comes back, revitalizes the items, unbeknownst to the kids. But the kids, they want to take their own souvenir, and the kids that are able to take them, like Isaiah takes a camera, Margot takes Slappy, and I think Lucas takes a paper mache worm that's supposed to look like the giant worm from Go Eat Worms. You might be like, where's Isabella? Well, Isabella, she is not in this core group of 4 in this story. She's actually a pretty heinous biatch. She's going around essentially like a stalker, gathering dirt on people, kind of like how Nathan Bratt was. And it seems like she might have a close relationship with Nathan Bratt, and she's ready and willing to leak all this information out there. But as she's following the kids, and after they leave, she ends up finding her own item, which is a mask, which will later become the haunted mask. And in this version, it's an actual Halloween mask. It's not some stupid white face that turns into a troll. Okay, so she gets her mask, and that leaves James with the cuckoo clock, which James decides that he's going to come back later and observe the cuckoo clock because he thinks it looks beautiful and it reminds him of a clock that his father had. And this starts off episode 2, which is the cuckoo clock of doom. So after all the kids take their items, James is pretty much the purveyor of the rest of the events of the story. So James, he doesn't know that in the very end of episode 1, because I don't want to give too much away because it will play near the ending when I get to my final 3 episodes, but the yellow mist has come back and has reanimated a dead corpse from underneath the cavern, and now the corpse knows the way back into the house, and we know that is going to be Harold Biddle. So now he is a undead revenant, like the Darkfall zombies from Welcome to Dead House, who already have one monster activated. So James, he decides to go back into the house to look at the cuckoo clock, and he desperately wants to have it because in this version of the story, James, he can be gay like his former counterpart, but he's more of a delinquent. He acts out. He doesn't have a father figure in his life, and his dad died tragically when he was just an infant, and he would give anything to go back to save his dad, which plays into the story of the cuckoo clock. When the cuckoo comes out, he accidentally bumps it and knocks its head backwards, which sends him back in time. And once James realizes that he's getting younger and younger throughout all these experiences and reliving some close calls that he's had in some embarrassing moments in the past, he ends up to where his dad is in the past, and he realizes that um, all these answers that he's been looking for all these years, he finally gets of what happened to his father, and it may or may not involve Nathan Bratt. Nathan Bratt, his own principal, and he's armed with this information. So when he finds a way to go back to present day, he's now bloodthirsty for Nathan Bratt because he knows something that he did. And this is going to play later on. Well, unbeknownst to him, the Revenant, after James leaves the house and has a close call with the cuckoo clock, the Revenant comes, sees the cuckoo clock's head, and rips it off, which implies that perhaps they're now stuck in a perpetual time loop, which will play an important factor later on. So, episode 3, because of this head being lopped off, James had, he starts off in episode 3 talking with Isaiah. And Isaiah, he's like, "What do you have against Nathan Bratt?" He's like, "We got to dig up all the dirt we can. You got that camera from that guy's room, right?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, we need to take some surveillance photos of Nathan Bratt. I think he did something to my dad." And this kicks off Say Cheese and Die. So Isaiah is now the main character of episode 3. He's having the camera, and he wants to get some surveillance on Nathan Bratt for his friend. But in casual photos, he notices that the pictures don't come out right. They look like they're predicting things that aren't even happening in the photos, and they're all bad. They're bad omens, essentially. And he learns that this camera has some mysterious power that can alter events to actually will them to happen. And he tests this out on this other jock guy that's a complete asshole on his football team. He snaps a photo of him, and it causes the guy to break his leg in a graphic way. And this freaks him out. He's like, "Holy crap, I have like the power of God in my hands. I don't know what to do with it." So he goes to his friends, and his friends are like, "Come on, man, stop pulling my chain." But the only person that believes him is James, because he's the only person that's gone through something similar. And he's like, "Hey, man, let me take the camera, and I'm going to go take a picture of Nathan Bratt. And tonight will be the perfect night because you have a football game." Well, unbeknownst to him, Nathan Bratt, at this point in the story, we don't know anything, but there's a massive revelation going on that he may or may not have. I don't know. He may or may not have known that this camera perhaps is doing something, and it may or may not involve him talking with the undead revenant of Harold Biddle, who might be working with him to enact revenge on all their parents. Well, Nathan, he decides to, go to the game, and he strategically sits himself next to Isaiah's dad. And Isaiah's at the football game, and James is trying to take a photo, and Brett's like, "Gotcha," and throws Isaiah's dad in front of the camera, which causes Isaiah's dad to have a heart attack, which distracts Isaiah to the point where he gets hit hard, has a concussion, and gets violently, like, his arm broken, which sends him to the hospital. And all of his friends come to the hospital, and they realize the gravitude of the situation. Isaiah and his dad are now in the hospital together. Which brings us to episode 4, which is Go Eat Worms. Now, Lucas is at the hospital. We haven't seen much of Lucas since he got the paper mache worm, but Lucas has decided to, come to the hospital to, see his friend. But his mom works over at the nearby diner, Port Lawrence, wherever the story takes place. You can pick wherever. And she needs him to come cover a shift. So he's like, okay. And since they live, like, we're going the similar idea where they live at the diner and they live upstairs. He's like, okay, I'll come home and, I'll help close the store so you can go do what you need to do. And he bids his friends farewell. And when he gets home, he realizes that, there's not a lot of customers, so he's going to close up early and go upstairs. But when he goes upstairs and brings some food, he has this worm terrarium where he's put his paper mache. And when he moves the paper mache, he notices that the worms, like, look towards it. He's like, "Whoa, what's going on with this?" And when he's holding the worm, it's starting to turn slimy. And he's freaked out, and he throws it, and it crawls and slithers away. He's like, "Okay, this is weird." And he's like, "Well, maybe I've had a long day." He's had a lot of trauma in one day. He's like, "I just need to sit down and rest." Unbeknownst to him, the worm is deciding to ambush him and crawl down his throat, down his esophagus, into his body. Now he's eaten the actual worm. He's actually eaten a worm, like Todd does in the book. Well, after he eats the worm, this is where the retroactive ideas come in. He's like, invulnerable to pain. He's like immune to it. He breaks, like he can like slap himself real hard, dislocate his shoulder, nothing happens. So he's like, well, now I'm an immune daredevil. So he decides to go put on a stunt at school the following day, which catches the attention of Isabella. And Isabella's like, what made you so impervious to pain? And he's like, well, if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. And this intrigues Isabella to kind of dig a little deep into what's going on with Lucas. And the other kids, Isaiah comes out of the hospital with a broken arm. His dad is still in the hospital. And James is, still looking for Brett. Well, Nathan Brett kind of pays attention to Lucas and realizes that, hey, this guy has like super strength. So he pretty much gives the okay for Lucas to do the stunt. And when he does this stunt, he doesn't know that the worm is like pretty much planning to send these smaller worms up to him to, essentially freak him out and distract him. And when that happens, the worm kind of like dissolves its power in him and he actually gets hurt again. So, Lucas gets hurt and the worm crawls out of his body and the kids see this and the worms all go and escape and they head back to a certain direction. And they're like, okay, well, it's pretty much become Night of the Living Worms and they have to go essentially hunt them all down and beat them up and destroy them. And you get guts flying everywhere, blah, blah, blah. And some may be lurking around, of which, catches the attention of Nathan Brad. And we start to get a little more breadcrumbs about what's going on with Brad and what's going on with Biddle in the undead revenant form. And there may or may not be a plot over in a graveyard somewhere where Biddle is planning on using these worms to maybe resurrect a whole army, kind of like Welcome to Deadhouse, for some planned reason, right? Which ties into episode 5. Now, this one is centered around the Slappy doll. So this is the Slappy episode. We have Margot in the story. Now, Margot's been more of a side character at this point. She realizes very early on that Biddle was a Goosebumps fan. So she has been looking through Goosebumps books and reading up on what happens in the stories. And she starts to kind of plug what's been happening with her friends. And she starts to prod and say, well, have y'all had any weird experiences with things that you got? And they're like, yeah, we did. And she's like, well, this might have happened in a Goosebumps book. And they're looking at it and they start to realize that, hey, something is going on with these items and they may or may not be like real life Goosebumps items or monsters coming out into the real world, which begs the question to all of them, well, what about the dummy that you have? And the dummy is playing coy. They don't know anything, what's going on with the dummy. And they're like, well, in the book, he has a spell card in his pocket. And they go into his pocket and sure enough, they find the spell card. And because of, shits and gigs, let's just say, Margot's like, hey, if all those things happen to you, if we can disprove that it's not going to happen here, then maybe it's just all in our minds. Some actual disbelief you can put at the door here. So she reads the spell, nothing happens, and all of her friends leave. However, since Margot is shy and outspoken, she decides to kind of play around with the dummy, and we get to see her relationship. I'll give her some siblings in the story, where she's kind of playing with Slappy to cheer up her younger sister, but Slappy is saying some horrid things to her that she's like, I'm not saying this. And then she realizes real quick, oh crap, I brought this dummy to life. And she knows that he's alive, but he doesn't know that she knows that he's alive. So she's kind of playing a cat and a mouse game the whole episode, kind of using the Goosebumps book as a cheat sheet to see what Slappy's going to do next. But Slappy, at least in this version, is a whole lot more meaner and a bit different than his book counterpart. And she's starting to speculate what is the reason to why. And then, of course, this builds up to a scenario where Slappy, of course, has this planned thing where he's like, I want to make you my slave, blah, blah, blah. And they try to dispose of him, throw him out into the landfill. And the episode kind of ends off on what's going to happen to Slappy. He's in the landfill, but of course, we see Biddle in his revenant form come and pick him up, and he's bringing him to the graveyard where he's been playing around with these corpses. And now we see the worms are there, and we see the chopped off head of the cuckoo clock, and then he also has Isaiah's camera, and we don't know how he got it, but this ties into episode 6 here, which is The Haunted Mask, which is the final of the books. I know I've been rambling on for a while, but we're getting there, guys. So the Haunted Mask episode, we now have Isabella. Isabella's been a side character for a majority of the story, and she's been kind of in and out of it. Well, the last time we really saw her, she was investigating what happened to Lucas and this worm phenomenon, and she's been kind of digging around and connecting the dots, and because she's like a sleuth in this version, that ever since these kids that she was spying on went into Biddle's house, all these supernatural things have started to happen in Port Lawrence, and it's unexplained phenomenon. And she's doing some interviews, kind of doing an expose. And little does she know that it's 2 days before Halloween at this point, and all this stuff has been happening within the past few days. So she takes it upon herself, since there's a Halloween party coming up at this random guy's at their high school's house, where all the teens are planning on going to just kind of, get their mind off of things, and also they're going there so they can have kind of a blanket reason for Brat not to follow them, because they started to kind of catch on the whole that Nathan Brat is up to no good, and James is really onto that. But Isabella doesn't know that part of the story yet. She could, because she's friends with Nathan Brat. So she's telling Nathan all this information, which is kind of feeding him the ammunition he needs. And he knows that all these kids are going to be at this party, which is good ammunition to tell his dead friend Harold Biddle that it might be a good time to sabotage the party. All we have to do now is get all their parents there so you can get your big revenge. So Isabella goes to the party, and she's like, you know what? I might as well bring this mask that I stole, because I think it's kind of cool. And she doesn't know that Nathan Brat knows what the mask looks like. So when she goes to the party with the mask on, Brat sees it, which pisses him off. He's like, I can't believe she actually stole something too. So now he's like, he tells Harold, have at it if you want. So we see the mask start to kind of absorb to her skin, and she's kind of struggling to take it off in the bathroom. She's like, well, that's weird. Well, I got to go put it back on. I got to do more sleuthing. So she's going around the party on Halloween, sleuthing around. And then all of a sudden she gets these impulses to do things, to like breaks things. And then she kind of forgets why she's doing what she's doing, and just starts going on a maniac spree, essentially, and scaring all the kids, some kids out of the party, essentially. And she realizes at a certain point the mask is fused to her face, and this freaks her out. She goes over to the other kids that she's been spying on. She goes, I'm Isabella. You got to believe me, I'm Isabella. They're like, you don't look like Isabella, girl. You look like some monster that's going on with this house. She goes, no. I took the mask from the house. And they're like, oh shit, we got to help her. So they go through what they think they need to help her. And Margaret's like, wait, the Goosebumps book, that's a cheat sheet. There's a symbol of love. And they're trying to find a symbol of love for Isabella. And Isabella doesn't really have one, but she has a little brother at home. So she thinks it would be a good idea to go home and, use her brother as a symbol of love to help her get the mask off. Well, this, of course, frightens her brother. And the kids are like, no. You need to, like, come hug Isabella, blah, 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 blah. And when they try to hug, it's all interrupted by Biddle and Brat, who have now taken upon themselves to interject in the story finally. And they say, the jig is up. You need to come back to this. You need to come back to Biddle's house now, because you guys found a way to escape. All these side quests and all this are done. We're gonna need you to come with us. So they essentially kidnap the children, bring them back to Biddle's house, and from there we have the final 3 episodes, which is Give Yourself Goosebumps Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3, which is the ultimate finale of the story. Well, the kids all now know the cheat sheet of the Goosebumps stories and how they're being kind of tweaked a little bit. They're not quite the same. They can't really pinpoint the reason why. The parents we're now shifted to the parents' perspective a little bit for episode 7, aka Part 1, and they're all having a meeting together, and they haven't hung out together in private for a long time. And they're like, have you noticed that all of our kids have been like really distant lately, or have been getting into some things they normally aren't into? And they start to piece together some information after digging into some of their private possessions that they snuck off to the Biddle house. And in one particular instance, Lucas's mom realizes that the night he was supposed to cover the shift for me, he very next day was doing daredevil stunts and wasn't getting injured by anything. And he was showing me in the morning without me noticing that he was essentially like moving his ribs around his like chest and didn't do anything. And like it didn't phase him or anything. I thought that was really strange. They're like, well, do you think it has anything to do with what's been going on at the Biddle house? So they take it upon themselves to kind of investigate it a little more. And then they find Margot's diary slash laptop, which has been piecing together James's testimony and James's text messages and all this about his theories about what's going on with Nathan Bratt. And the parents are like, holy crap, Nathan Bratt, you know, he has to be involved with this because he was Harold's best friend. He's doing something with this house. And they realize when they go to look at the house that the house has been refurbished. They're like, does Bratt own the house? And one of the parents is actually a real estate agent. She's like, well, I can find out. So they go and do some investigating, find out that Bratt bought the house, but they don't know why. And that feeds into some more answers you get in back half of 7, where we find out why Bratt bought the house and why he's actually fixing it up. And perhaps he knows a lot more information than he's letting on. Well, in part 8, we go back to the kids who are stuck in the house and they are dealing with Biddle and Brad. And Biddle essentially tells them that I'm not after you, I'm after your parents. And if your parents are gone, I promise you, I will leave you alone and we don't have to go any further than what we're doing now. And the kids are like, why would we let you take our parents? Why is that good? And he's like telling them his side of the story. And he tells them what he knows about the house and what he kind of learned from that night. And the kids realize that, wait, there's a yellow mist under the house. There's a cavern under the house. What are you talking about? So they're like, Harold's like, I can show you. He takes him down to below the caverns and they go exploring and they find this yellow gas and this yellow light, of course, brewing from underneath his home. And they realize that, hey, maybe this place is some sort of weird place of land that brings all these monsters to life. And Biddle's like, you would be correct. He's like, I was resurrected from this. And he's like, to prove it to you, this gives us powers. And he's like, what? And the kids are like, what do you mean? And he shows them his undead army. He shows them all these worms that he's built up. And he's like, Slappy comes out of the ether, and Slappy now has a bunch of his puppet friends. You can say Mary Ellen, whatever. You can go complete fan service with it. And of course, now you have Isabella still stuck in the mask. Isabella is charmed by this and wants to be a mask, be like the mask. Well, Harold's like, this is simple. If you guys don't bring me your parents, I'm going to unleash this on the town and hurt everybody else, including you and your parents. So you guys have 24 hours by the end of Halloween night to bring me your parents. And if you don't bring me them, I'm going to destroy the town and everybody that's in it. And Nathan Bratt's in on the plan, and he's dying to do so. Well, give yourself goosebumps. Part 3 is the ultimate climax finish. It's Halloween night. Everybody's out trick-or-treating, celebrating the festivities, and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Guys, the town's in trouble. We need to save everybody. Everybody needs to get out of this town. And everybody's like, what do you mean? It's Halloween, dude. We're going to be on the streets at night. We're going to go trick-or-treating. We're not leaving. And then the parents are looking for the kids indirectly as well. And they might clash at one point, and something might happen to the parents. And we find out what's going to happen with them, with Biddle and with Bratt. And we finally get the concrete answers of why Bratt bought the house. And I'm kind of leaning towards the angle of he knew about the mist because there was an underlying story that wasn't mentioned beforehand where when he was at the sleepover with Harold and they went to the underground cavern, the yellow mist kind of brought to life his own Goosebumps monster, which he has in his back pocket, which will be the catalyst for season 2 with the same cast. Because let's just say something happens to Harold Biddle and his army of undead people and all these monsters that he's infiltrated onto the town now gets put a stop to it. But Nathan Bratt's monster is still alive. And I don't want to give too much away with my idea here for what season 2 would be, because that could be its own video at some other point. Maybe if we don't like season 2 and how we would have done it. The jumping off point would have been that he had, let's just say how do I put this? He had well, we'll get there when we get there. I don't want to spoil it, but that's the catalyst for season 2, and the monster that he's had for all these years is still alive, and somehow the yellow gas phenomenon around Halloween might have some more connotations and to build on from that. So that's essentially my season. I know I spent a long time talking about that, but yeah, it's just 9 episodes, and everything's kind of connected. The characters are all going through their own uh, singular stories, and then coming together in a final 3-parter to kind of tie it all together and why these things have happened. And they just build on. Each episode builds on to the next character, so on and so forth. Oh yeah, and if you're wondering what happened with the cuckoo clock head, well, there's a point in part 3 where I had this idea where the kids realize they need to get the head and go back in time to kill Biddle for sure and make sure that he doesn't come back. So they go back to the night where they broke into the house, and simply instead of doing what they're doing, they decide to essentially erase time, erase the whole timeline they just went through and all the damage they caused, and reset everything and erase their memories. But for some reason, because they did that, they were able to actually retain their memories because James went back in time, and then they went back to fix his James timeline. So the timeline they're in now is a fixed timeline. So they're the only people that know. And Brett has no idea that the kids know that he has an object. So that's the catalyst. That's why I didn't want to give too much away there. But yeah, that's my idea of season 1.
Yeah, that's an awesome idea though. Like I really love like the whole meta aspect to it. I think that's really clever. Kind of like keeping in similar tone to how the Goosebumps movies kind of use their meta aspects. I kind of like that kind of continues on, but uses them in a more interesting way than the movies, because the movies, they didn't really use the meta-ness in a very interesting way. Like, they don't use their knowledge of the Goosebumps books to defeat the monsters in the movie or anything like that. So I like that you incorporated that element in where they use the books as like these kind of study guides to how they can defeat the monsters and things like that. And like, I don't know, I like that you made Brat a more actual villain though, instead of just a worthless nitwit who didn't need to be in the season.
Yeah, that was the thing. Like, I thought that the easiest correlation to add Brad into the story would be he would be Harold Biddle's childhood best friend, and that's how you can incorporate him into the modern, and his involvement in the story. He's doing all this for his friend, so he has a motive, right? He has some empathetic motive there. His friend was pretty much murdered, and he wants justification for his friend's death, so it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was just really well done. Definitely better than mine. I like mine, but like I think yours is definitely more concrete, just because you had obviously more experience doing like creating plots and writing stuff than I do. So
yeah, I think the direction of my season, my whole trajectory was I wanted to put as much fan service and meta aspects as possible without going too overboard with it, right? I wanted the meta to be a part of the story that kind of helps, extenuate the plot, but doesn't make it the driving force of it. You know what I mean? I wanted to still have some intrigue and mystery, like the yellow mist. That goes back to Welcome to Dead House, right? The whole precursor to this event is that this supernatural force is bringing these Goosebumps fan made items to life and bringing Goosebumps from fiction to reality. And while that's meta, that's not really the driving force. It's still going off of something that you have to put disbelief at the door with. It's still going off that level of intrigue and mystery. And I wanted each episode to interconnect in a smart way and not feel tangent like to the others. I wanted them all to kind of arrive to the point of the 3-part finale in that straight line kind of way. And yeah, while I went over the straight line approach of telling you the story, there could be some side plots and all that with characters and relationships that get fleshed out. Like my idea of the characters of the 3 male characters like James, Isaiah, and Lucas is that they're all friends from childhood, even though in high school they kind of gone their separate ways in terms of their cliques and interests. They're still friends, and they kind of defy the odds of being in a clique. Margot, like I said, she's a 4th wheel, but she's also like the brains of the group. Obviously, she's more intuitive. She's more introverted, so she's able to kind of think a little deeper on things than the guys are. And then Isabella, she's the outsider friend that kind of gets roped into the story and becomes a pretty much like an extra friend to the group because she has this shared experience, even though they've been at odds. By the end, they kind of come together and realize, hey, we shouldn't be friends. And then, of course, I didn't touch on this too much, but Isabella and Brat's hidden relationship I threw in there, where they're like, Isabella doesn't have real friends, and her only friend is Nathan Bratt, but she realizes that he's using her for information or used it against her and wants to keep her in the mask. She realizes that that's not a symbol of love, and the real symbol of love should be from somebody that actually genuinely cares about her, and that's what ultimately ends up helping her. And she can see right through Brat by the end. So she has her own character arc. So I wanted each character to kind of bring something to the table, but also have an intriguing level to the story and actually impact the story moving forward. Unlike the actual season we got, where Isabella puts on a haunted mask for one episode and we never see what happens with it ever again. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted that to have direct consequences onto the events later on. In some ways, more direct than others. In some ways, just kind of introduce a new plot point. Because by the time I got to Night of the Living Dummy, I was like, now we got to get to the point of, Margot introducing, hey, these books are like cheat sheets. She's piecing together some information herself, and then this is how her characters are presented. So yeah, I had fun with this. I had
Yeah, for
fun
sure.
dissecting how I would make the characters in my own head.
Yeah, same. And I forgot to mention this in my synopsis, but the haunted mask is another item that comes back later on this season in the finale. And well, because of the fact that like Isabella kind of learns in her experience with the mask earlier that like I remember I'm not really sure how she does it. I'm still trying to piece that together, but she ends up learning, the whole rule of once you put it on the third time, it's stuck forever. And in the finale episode of Welcome to Horrorland, there's a moment where she realizes that in order to stop this, she needs the power of the mask and is basically willing to do like a little sacrifice and put the mask on a third time, knowing what's going to happen to her in order to save everybody. But of course, because the entity is defeated, that kind of reverts and she's able to take off the mask. But I kind of wanted that to kind of be implemented as well into the finale as kind of a bit of character development for her, as well as just a way to bring the mask back, so it's not just a standalone in the haunted mask episode and then never come back.
I had a fun idea because I didn't want to give too much away, but I guess I'll give it away here. The ultimate climax in GYG Part 3 for me is that I had an homage to Welcome to Dead House's book, where they go into the town, like the town square, and they go to the movie theater and all that, and they realize, hey, they don't like the sunlight. Well, Biddle this whole time has come back, but he fails to remember one thing about Welcome to Dead House, that Margot was able to kind of pick the pieces up. She's like, wait, he's kind of like the zombie people from Welcome to Dead House. They don't like sunlight. So it's becoming Halloween night. Things are kind of lasting through to the daytime because it's the lore of the mist, right? It disappears once daylight hits on November 1st. So they're like, okay, well, they pick up some information, throughout the story, and they kind of piece together like an old urban legend at the library about this mist and how these people from the town have, it's rumored to exist, and over like years ago, it would bring objects to life, or random things would happen, and people would always say this yellow mist was around, right? Well, it's getting to dawn, and the characters have been out all Halloween night, and they're being chased down by Biddle's army of undead people, and the sun's about to come out, and you get that homage to the Welcome to Dead House story where they knock down the tree and the sunlight just comes through and just decimates them all. That's how my envisioning of Biddle will go out. He's become a Goosebumps character himself because he was such a rabid
Mm-hmm.
fan, and because he died in that way, essentially what the mist did was turned him into an object. And that's how he dies. But of course, the whole timeline gets repealed because once he's gone and the cuckoo clock head is found, they realize that something else terrible has happened, and James realizes the only way to fix it is to go back in time and just make sure it just never happened. So they roll the dice, they go back in time, and Isabella has this whole heartbreaking moment. She's like, "Are you guys not going to be my friends anymore?" And they're like, "You know what? If not, just know that after tonight we do consider you a friend for what you did." So they all don't know what's going to happen when they go back in time to stop this event. They go back in time to stop it, but they retain their memories. Luckily for them, they get to have their happy ending for now, because they forgot this one aspect that Brett had an object alive the whole time, and now they might have to deal with that again. So it might be bringing out a whole new story. Who knows? Or maybe you go the anthology route and just abandon it. I might have written myself in a corner there, but there's a lot of room for open possibilities. I don't know if people still want to do Yellow Mist every season, but it's a good jumping off point. go from there, I guess. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. And like, I also like when you talk about go eat worms. Like, I don't know why, but when I envision when you mentioned like the giant worm, like forcing Lucas to eat him, that visual almost reminds me of Freddy versus Jason. The scene where like that Freddy caterpillar like crawls down Freeberg's throat. That's kind of like what I'm envisioning during that sequence.
Yeah, that was my exact. That was my influence. I was like, that would be cool to see in Goosebumps. Like, just imagine Lucas being like pretty much forced to swallow this humongous worm that was paper mache at one point, but now has become a real worm. That's disgusting. That would have freaked me out. So I was like, yeah, gotta have some scary moments, I guess.
Yeah. And out of curiosity, like out of the episodes I described to you, what was your kind of like favorite of the episode descriptions that I gave?
I like the build up to the final two episodes the most. I think your story has a pretty epic climax given the entity and how he's like pretty much developed I don't know, a playground of sorts to play with them. And I think that's kind of a fun way to put Horrorland at the tail end of the season as a playground to mess with the kids. And they have to go through, the Doomsday Slide, and there's the homage scenes. Like, you don't have to directly reference a book's title in the episode to convey that. You can just subtly use something from Ghost Next Door, Fever Swamp, Piano Lessons Give Me Murder. I like that. I like that approach. So, yeah, I like the build up there too, and I like the direction you went with James. I like that too. The emotional stuff that was pretty good.
It's kind of funny when I heard your stuff though. It's kind of we each kind of had like a similar idea for how James would use the cuckoo clock, which is kind of funny.
And if you're wondering, because I don't think I mentioned this, what happened to James's dad from Brett? Well, James's dad died in an accident, similar to how you talked about James's mom. But the accident, it was made to look like an accident, and it was Brett doing it because Brett was trying to extort James's father, who was actually part of the friend group that sabotaged his friend Harold Biddle back in the day. But he was the only one of that group that died because James's mom and dad were childhood sweethearts. So he was being extorted by Brett, and Brett pretty much had him killed and made it look like an accident because he was threatening to expose him to the police because he had some dirt on him. And Brett in this version, he's like a principal of a school, but he's kind of running this extortion ring for many years, and all these people from this high school event that he witnessed, they all own their own businesses. They're all pretty successful, but they've been siphoning money to this guy for years. And the whole rabbit hole about extortion, it just runs deep with that. And that's what James's character mainly discovers, is that his dad needs vindication, right? His dad needs justice. And he's pretty much the torchbearer of the season to let's go get Brett. He's like, let's do this. I'm motivated more than ever. He's the most motivated out of all of them to put a stop to him. So that's James's arc. He wants his dad to get justice.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And that's what he had, and that's what he sacrifices at the end too. That's what makes him emotional in my story, is that by the end, when he has to put the cuckoo clock head and go back in time and erase everything that all this hard work he's put into, he realizes that maybe vengeance isn't all that worth it. Maybe his dad wouldn't have wanted it this way. Maybe it's just best that he didn't know this information, and everybody can have a happier life that way. So he's willing to potentially erase all the answers that he's been given to not have any answers anymore if it means that everybody else is happier. That's James's arc, which is pretty emotional and profound, and that's kind of how I wanted his character to be.
Yep, same with mine. Like the whole scene I envisioned for Cuckoo Clock of Doom is like when he's like reliving the events leading up to the accident, when he's in the car driving, because again he was the one who was driving when the accident happened, so that's why he kind of blames himself for his mom's death. And while he's driving, he gets to have this kind of conversation with his mom because in the past when he was doing it, he was very put offish and was just kind of being a kind of a jerk to her. Kind of like how in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, Peter was kind of rude to Uncle Ben before Uncle Ben got killed. It's kind of a similar situation to that, and that's another reason why James is kind of being eaten up inside because he's like, right before she died, he blames himself for the accident, and also like the last thing I said to her was that I hate her, and that like, I was
Yeah,
just the last memory of me was her anger, and
yeah,
so when he's able to go back in time and relive those moments, he's finally able to just kind of basically tell her that he loves her and that he'll always love her no matter what, and just kind of that emotional kind of moment and say the things he wishes he could have said the day of the actual accident happened.
yeah. I think it's funny how we kind of similarly see characters. Like, of course, we both saw James as this person that can be holding a lot of internal pain, and how he has to overcome it and possibly, put himself in a situation where he has to make a sacrifice to either know answers or get closure or not have those answers, which I think is cool. Um, like, in terms of the other characters, I saw Isaiah as a character who kind of lived in his dad's shadow, and he felt like his character is that he always does what his dad wants him to do, but his dad being injured, he kind of forced himself to look outward and like, hey, look, my dad's human just like me. My dad can get hurt. My dad's not this Superman. You know, I can make mistakes and I can be okay. That's Isaiah's character to me. Lucas, kind of similar. He's a daredevil. He has a single mom. I like the idea of him having his dad is dead, but essentially he died from being, a stunt man. And I like the angle that the show went with. So I like keeping the angle of Lucas where he kind of wants to be like his dad, inversely to Isaiah, but being like his dad, he realizes is dangerous. And
Mhm.
his dad is also mortal, and that his thing where he can't feel pain, that's more so that he's kind of realized he's shut himself off emotionally and he needs to be more open and in tune with that. Margot, she needs to come out of her shell. She's a quiet girl. Her arc is using Slappy and all this information that she gets to put herself in the forefront, put herself in the front lines, um, put herself leading the pack a little bit, and that boosts her confidence a little bit, and makes her feel more motivated and more confident to speak up. And then for Isabella, it's her arc is she thinks she knows everything, but she realizes that the real truth is scarier than what she flanderizes. She likes to flanderize things and exaggerate, and she realizes that over exaggerating isn't a good thing. And sometimes you just need to be transparent, and sometimes you just need to let yourself out there a little bit. You can't just think that people don't like you because you act a certain way. Maybe you should just be yourself and see if people like you authentically. And she learns that, and she also learns a good valuable lesson on who you really can trust. And that's kind of harsh, but it's a harsh lesson that I think her character is more equipped with dealing more than the other ones. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like I've noticed too, like kind of where each of our writing strengths shines. Like while you have a lot of good events, you definitely seem to be much better at writing characters than I do. Like James was my big character. The rest of them I've like again, I only really kind of delved into their interests and stuff just because I'm not very good at fully fleshing out characters. Aside, for some reason, I really was on a streak with James, and that was like it. But
If we're going to go into any subplot ideas, did you have any subplot ideas with the characters in mind? Like, because we didn't touch on like that in the grand scheme, but if you had any subplot ideas, what would you work with the characters?
I honestly wasn't sure. I wasn't really thinking of any subplots when I was working on it. Like maybe like basic interactions, like in other episodes with them, like maybe encountering like in like the haunted mask. Maybe some of these characters are visiting the carnival when Isabella's going on her rampage on the mask, and they have like these little interactions like that. But I haven't really thought of any big subplots to go along with. But
See, I had an idea, and this starts with James. So James's episode kicks off his character for a good amount of the story is that he's now spying on Brat. His whole thing is getting dirt on Brat. possibly, working with, maybe there's a police officer in the story. Maybe his subplot is dealing with that. Isaiah, maybe he took a bunch of photos that haven't happened yet, so he's trying desperately to hold on to these photos and to help people in a subplot of his own, or maybe his own friends. He's like, man, I'm so sorry. I took a picture of you. Something bad might happen, blah, 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 whatever, and tries to help him. That could happen for like an episode or two. The Haunted Mask. There's not much of a subplot with that, because what happens is Isabella feeds directly into the finale. But Isabella, the intrigue that she has something that she's hiding from everyone, including Brat. She's hiding that from Brat. I think maybe you could play on the idea that she has paranoia about having the mask, and she's like, "What do I do with it? Blah blah blah. Should I wear it? Should I not? Should I use it? Should I return it?" She kind of contemplates that. And then for Lucas, the worm, he kind of treats it like this cool treasure toy thing. But when the worms, infect his body, he can start feeling pain. And after he gets hurt, he's trying to rehab, and he's going through withdrawals of having the worms a little bit. Or maybe he realizes that he felt a little better with the worms inside, because once the worms leave, it feels like they open internal wounds of insecurity. And he's dealing with insecurity now and all these flood of emotions that he has about his own dad. And Margot with Slappy kind of starts some drama with her and her family, and says things that Margot normally wouldn't say. And now she's dealing with the repercussions with her family. Like, did you really mean this when you said this? And she's like, I didn't mean to say that, but now that you mention it, yeah, I should have said it. I should have said it. I didn't say it, but I'm glad it was said. And you can deal with drama that way, in a relatable way, without going parent adultery, without going love triangles. It's all relatable stuff, dealing with just personal things the characters go through. Real relatable things. Kind of like how Degrassi works. But, even Degrassi is kind of to Goosebumps 2023's actual season extent sometimes. But I mean more in that slice of life, realistic way, with that Goosebumps flair in it. That's what I wanted out of the characters. And that's what I think I was trying to bring. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually just thought of a subplot to kind of go with Isaiah's character, because in Say Cheese and Die, we established Isaiah has a friend named Sherry, who is kind of like a friend and also maybe a tiny bit of a love interest, but it's not going to be like teen drama over focused on that like 2023 season was. But basically, after taking the picture of Sherry and she disappears, kind of like in the book, his subplot throughout the season is trying to figure out a way to bring Sherry back, because at the end of episode 1, she's still not back yet, because the entity is still controlling everything and it's not been defeated. So all of the effects of the camera are still in play. So he's kind of like eaten up over the fact that Sherry's gone. He's like, the whole season's him trying to figure out how to get her back. So.
Oh, so you want him to get the girlfriend? Is that her name from the actual season, Sherry?
No, her name in the series, I think, is like Madison or something. I can't remember, but I'm naming her Sherry in this because Greg's friend in Say Cheese and Die was named Sherry. So
okay.
That's like another little homage to the book.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Maybe the parent characters could be named after the actual characters from the story. So like Lucas's dad could be named Todd, or
I say Isabella's mom can be named Carly.
Yeah. So where the character, Greg could be Isaiah's dad. Who knows?
Yeah.
And you can say or imply that, maybe they're kind of being directed at the books, or maybe the books somehow took inspiration from the names. I don't know, but I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and with the Haunted Mask episode as well. I'm with mainly the scene where Isabella is finally fully taken over by the mask in the episode. I'm wanting to go full on body horror during that sequence, kind of a drawn out, again, kind of in person, the Jim Carrey is when he first puts on the mask where wraps around his head and stuff, but make it very grotesque and have her starts have this intense music, have Isabella screaming and panicking, and maybe kind of how in the 2023 show her her hands start becoming monster hands and things like that. And I don't know, I just really think that would be a good way to bring some serious horror into that episode, is just go full intensity with the mask taking her over.
Yeah, one more thing to add for mine. So some people, if you're still out there watching, thank you. About the idea about the Goosebumps books, how do the Goosebumps books have anything to do with my story, right? Well, I was thinking Evil Dead Necronomicon kind of style with it. And like, you know how like in the Necronomicon in the Evil Dead movies, you chant the spell and the evil dead come to life. Well, the inverse would happen in my story. Well, the supernatural force sees the Goosebumps books and thinks that it's pretty cool to play with. So they're using the Goosebumps books as inspiration itself to put onto Biddle's items, his fan-made items, and they use that to make those things come to life because they think it's a good template. I like the intrigue of that idea, and the supernatural force. It comes around every Halloween. You can't really stop it, but knowing that it's there, it helps you more prepared on how to handle it. Like if you have Goosebumps books laying around where it has easy access at a choke point, it's going to say, "Hey, look, let me look through these books. Oh yeah, he has something that looks like that. Let's play with that." You know, destroy the item or make sure that you get rid of it. If it's near a graveyard, it's making some zombies. You know, if it's supposed to be Welcome to Dead House, get some sunlight ready. You know, that's my thought process on it. So
yeah, I'm sure.
But if that is all we have left to say, that was our season 1 ideas. I know this has been a long video, but we had both pretty lengthy ideas, and I think they were both really great. Honestly, Micah, if you're not sub to Micah, please go sub up to his channel, The Ultimate Goosebumps Man. I'm gonna have his link in the comment section and in the description of this video. Please go sub him up, show him some support. I think he just recently put out the Girl Who Cried Monster book and episode review. So he's going one by one through the original 62. Go check out his content and see his thoughts on the first 8 books so far and episodes that they have him. He's a really great YouTuber and he's awesome. He's also a fellow Goose Junkies podcast member. And you'll definitely be seeing him on my channel in the future, in future collabs, and on Goose Junkies podcast. So yeah, please go show him all the love and support that you can. And let us know down in the comment section, did you like Goosebumps Season 1 as is? Would you have done it differently? And if so, what would your idea be, or a general concept, or what books would you have added on to the ones that were already there? We're dying to know, and we'll see you next time. See you later.
See ya.